As a young man, Vincent had a passion for ministry. He wanted to go out and he wanted to serve people and he wanted to serve God. His passion led him to the Belgian coal fields, specifically to the area in Borinage, where he pastored a church, he preached to the miners, and he helped the injured, fed the hungry, and the people fell in love with him. They were so grateful for all of the hard work that he was doing to serve the community that he was in. In fact, his church was filled every week with people who were eager to learn about Jesus. One day in the winter of 1879, Vincent had a meeting with one of his denominational leaders, hoping for some encouragement and maybe a little bit of help in the work that he was doing. Vincent was really disappointed when his boss basically told him that they weren't happy with what he was doing. They were upset because he wore used clothing and he lived in a shack and he gave all of his money away to the people. In fact, his boss said to him, he said, "You look worse than the people that you came to teach." And Vincent asked him in reply, he said, "Wouldn't Jesus have done the same?" Well, his answer to that question was being given notice that he was being dismissed from the ministry in that city. He was hurt and he was angry. All he wanted to do was to build a church that brought glory to God and led people to him. And why couldn't his superiors not see that? In fact, it's recorded that he told an acquaintance of his, he said, "They think I'm a madman because I wanted to be a true Christian. They turned me out like a dog, saying that I was causing a scandal." Can you believe it? He was so disappointed in the people that he thought he was going to rely on. Have you ever had someone disappoint you? I'm not talking about being disappointed in someone because they didn't live up to their potential or because they did something that hurt themselves or others. I'm talking about having someone directly disappoint you, where it had a direct impact on you. You know, I think if we think about it, most of us probably wouldn't take very long to get an image in our head of the person who disappointed us. It might be a lot of people. You probably have a picture or pictures of that person in your head right now. You know, maybe it's a friend who, when you're going on vacation, says that they'd be happy to come over to your house and get the mail, feed the cat, and water the plants. So you're grateful you can go and relax because you know someone is coming and someone will be there. 2 weeks later, you get home and the mail is spilling out of the mailbox. The cat is starving and all the plants are dead. Or maybe you have a cousin who offers to give you a ride to work in the morning this time instead of the other way around because your car is in the shop. And so you tell her you have an important meeting at 9 a.m. and so don't be late. And she finally gets to your house, except she gets to your house at 9 a.m. She's late, and so now you're late. Or maybe you have a buddy who says that he's throwing a birthday party for his kid this weekend and he needs to borrow a few $100s so that he can have a good birthday party for his kid, and he'll pay you next Friday when he gets paid. And so you're happy to do it because he's your friend, and Friday comes, and then the weekend comes, and finally it's a week later, and he's not answering your phone calls, he's not responding to your texts, he's ghosting you. Or maybe years ago your husband said out loud and in public, "Till death do us part." And then one day he walks in and tells you that he's found a greener pasture somewhere else, and he's leaving. You know, when those things happen, our natural reaction is to want to lash out. We want to tell that person how they failed us. We want to tell everyone we know how they've failed us. And we want everyone to know that they are the ones at fault. We want to put all the blame on them, and maybe somewhere down deep inside, in the midst of all of that blaming, we hope that that person will see the light and maybe come and try to fix it. So what do we do when people disappoint you? We actually get some counsel on this in the scriptures. There was a man named James who was the brother of Jesus. He ended up becoming the leader of the church in Jerusalem. And James was writing a letter to the leaders, other leaders of other churches who were dealing with quarreling and conflict. Not with people who were outside the church. They were dealing with quarreling and conflict with people inside the church. There was conflict because each side believed that they were doing and they were believing right, and they were essentially disappointed by the people on the other side who took different positions than they did or believed different things than they did. Listen to what James says as his counsel to them. He says, "Don't speak evil against each other, dear brothers and sisters." Now that phrase, speak evil, is actually one word. It's the Greek word katalaleite. And katalaleite just means defamation or backbiting. Now, defamation means saying something that injures another person's reputation. And backbiting is saying mean or spiteful things against a person when they're not around. Now, some of you may know, or you may have heard, if you've watched enough Law and Order, you know that truth is a defense to defamation. But it's still defamation. Whether it's true or not, it still causes harm to the person. It still injures their reputation. There are no qualifiers here. When James says, don't speak evil against each other, he doesn't give exceptions. He doesn't say, when you're frustrated with someone, it's okay. He doesn't say, when you're disappointed in someone, it's okay. James is saying that when people disappoint you, don't blame them, don't criticize them. When someone disappoints you, because of that disappointment, and because of it, you're set back, you're penalized, you've lost something. When someone's disappointment costs you something, we want to blame them. And we want everyone to know that they're the ones at fault. Because that's our tendency. Our tendency is to tell people, other people, how we were disappointed. To tell people who disappointed us. To tell people how we suffered because of that disappointment. And this never, ever makes things better. In fact, it almost always makes things worse. You know, the other thing that happens when we speak evil about other people is that we're blinded from seeing our own part in the problem. There was a man, is a man, he's still alive, I don't want to, he was, is. His name is Jim Collins, and some of you may know the name. Jim Collins studied 1,435 different companies. He examined their performance over a period of 40 years. And he discovered the principles that made only 11, out of those 1,435 companies move from good to great. Back in 2001, he wrote a book called Good to Great. It's one of the best-selling business books of all time, and it's still being read by and helping leaders today. It's one of my must-read books. One of the things that Jim Collins found was that the leaders of the companies that went from good to great were, in their hearts, humble. They were humble. When things were going well, they would look out across their organization and see who was contributing to their success, and then they would give those people the credit. The leader didn't try to take the credit for himself. He gave the credit to his team. But on the flip side of that, when things weren't going well, the leader doesn't look around for someone to blame. The leader looks in the mirror. They take responsibility for their failures. They don't blame their employees. They don't blame their team for anything. They ask themselves, where did I go wrong? Or how can I fix this now? See, these successful business leaders learned that in tough times, casting blame never works. In fact, they do what James wrote about more than 2,000 years ago. They don't speak evil against each other. Because when you cast blame, James says that you are making yourself the judge. You're putting yourself in the place of God. Listen to what he writes. He says, if you criticize and judge each other, then you are criticizing and judging God's law. But your job is to obey the law, not to judge whether it applies to you. See, James is saying that if you judge, you become a critic of the law, not a doer of the law. You know, last week we talked a little bit about this idea of the law of Christ and how the law of Christ is simply to love one another in the way that Jesus loved us. And when we criticize each other and when we judge each other, we are not loving each other the way Jesus loved us. In fact, we're doing the exact opposite of that. And James is saying that it is our job to obey the law, not to judge. That word judge is the Greek word krino. And it means to separate, to divide out, to decide on our own that we're going to separate somebody from the group. That's what judge means. And James would tell us that God alone, who gave the law, is the judge. He alone has the power to save or to destroy. So what right do you have to judge your neighbor? See, judging is God's job. It's not ours. Warren Wiersbe, who's an author and theologian, he put it this way. We are not called to be judges. God is the only judge. He is patient and understanding. His judgments are just and holy. We can leave the matter with Him. So what do we do when people disappoint us? We leave the matter with God. We leave it to Him. When people disappoint you, let God be the judge. Because we don't know everything that's going on in the life or in the mind of the person that disappointed us. And this is true whether the person who disappointed us is the random stranger who cut us off in traffic, or if this is somebody that we know so well that is so close to us, like our spouse, or our best friend, or our parent, or our child. Do you know who does know them? Who knows what they're thinking and what they're experiencing and how they're feeling? God knows them. He knows them. So let's let God be the judge. Because God sees what you and I can't see, and God knows what you and I don't know. He knows about the person, He knows about their situation, and He knows that ultimately He can make a better judgment than you or I could. God will judge the person, and that's what we want. You know why? Because you and I, we are horrible judges. When we judge someone, we want a verdict that helps us feel better. But when God judges someone, He releases a judgment that helps the other person be better. And that's why you and I can be grateful that God is the judge and that we are not. Because just as people have disappointed us, there are also times, and there will also be times, where we will disappoint other people. There's a man, his name is David Sunukian. He's the chair of Christian ministry and leadership at Talbot School of Theology. And he talks about this idea of you and I having the eyes of a judge or the eyes of a doctor. Picture in your mind for a moment that there's this guy at work. And he's the guy that everyone sees them, they just see him and they just shake their head. He's been divorced a couple of times. Both of them are suing for child support. He is your typical deadbeat dad. He's way behind on his child support payments. He sends a little bit every once in a while. He's living with another woman and her child. You heard a couple of weeks ago that he pushed her around a little bit. She called the cops and he spent a couple of nights in jail. She kicked him out, got a restraining order, and now he's living in one of those pay-by-the-month motels. And you see him every day at lunch. He goes off by himself. He gets a burger or a burrito. Always comes back with mustard or salsa on his shirt. At work, nobody wants to talk to him. I mean, he's always complaining about how his bosses and how the system is taking advantage of him. How there's always people around that are pushing his buttons, that are squeezing him dry. I mean, who wants to listen to that all day at work? And maybe you've thought about being nice. Maybe offering to go to lunch with him sometime. After all, you guys go to the same places for lunch. You have lunch at the same time. So should you invite him to join you for lunch? Absolutely. See, but if you have the eyes of a judge, you're going to want to keep him separate from you. You won't want to make eye contact. You won't want to make conversation. You'll keep your distance. But if you have the eyes of a doctor, then go out with him. Invite him to lunch. Talk to him. Ask him if he watched the Niner game on the weekend. Ask him if they have a chance to go all the way this year. The answer to that is yes. Right? Talk about the players. Talk about what's going on in his life. Enter into his world. Do you know why? Because with the eyes of a doctor, you can see the hurts that only God can heal. You see the reasons for his bitterness at life, for the frustrations that he's had at his failed relationships, for why he's had to, in his mind, blame other people for all of his problems because he doesn't know how to change himself. You'll get a sense about his fear of the future. He has no money. He has a criminal record. Feels like there are more people in his life that hate him than there are that he can call his friends. You'll hear the desperation in him over a future of being all alone. You see, with the eyes of a doctor, we can see the hurt that only God can heal. In life, we get a choice. We can choose to have the eyes of a judge or the eyes of a doctor. And when we look at people with the eyes of a judge, we reject the people that need Jesus in their life the most. Instead, let's look at people with the eyes of a doctor. Let's look at the people who disappoint us with love. Let's move closer to them, because when we move closer to them, we have an opportunity to lead them to the great physician, to the one who can heal the hurts that are inside them, the only one who can heal the brokenness that's not just in them, but the brokenness that is in each one of us. That's the way to handle the people who disappoint you. We don't condemn them. We don't judge them. Because listen, if judging was left to us, we would destroy the people that disappoint us, and eventually that would destroy us. So we should be grateful that we are not the judge. When people disappoint you, be grateful that God is the judge and not you or me. You remember our story of Pastor Vincent? He was disappointed by his superiors in his denomination and they just kicked him out. Well, after his dismissal, he was walking around one day and he was watching an old miner who was struggling to carry the bag of coal on his back. Moved by what he saw, Vincent sat down and he began to sketch the miner's bent over figure. He didn't realize it at the time, but he had discovered his true calling. You see, the young pastor who was disappointed by his boss, who was rejected by his denomination, eventually became the artist that the world will long remember. That young pastor was Vincent van Gogh. And he didn't let the judgment of those people, he didn't judge those people in his disappointment. Instead, he went on and he found where he was supposed to be. It could have been very, very different for him, but instead he left it to God. When people disappoint you, be grateful that God is the judge and not you, not me. You know, in the beginning I asked you, I said, there's someone already, many of you, you've already got in your minds that image, that face of that person, or maybe those people who have disappointed you so deeply. And what I want to do as we close our time together is I just want you to take that image. Just close your eyes for a moment and take that image of that person. And then I just want you to just say this to yourself. Father, let me see, and then put that person's name in. Father, let me see this person with the eyes of a doctor. I know you can heal them. So help me lead them to you. I say that one more time. Father, let me see this person with the eyes of a doctor. I know you can heal them, so help me lead them to you.
Thank you for joining us for this week's message. Gracepoint Church is located in South San Francisco, California. For additional content or to find out more information about Gracepoint Church, visit us online at wearegracepoint.com.